ब्रह्मनाथ ओम शांति 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 स्वस्थ। Hello students, in the previous class we discussed about the malaria, in which we discussed the types of malaria, under which we discussed the 4 species of plasmodium. One is the Plasmodium falciparum, Plasmodium vivax, Plasmodium ovale and the Plasmodium malariae. Further we discussed the various clinical symptoms of the malaria, which includes chill, fever and also enlargement of the spleen. Then we discussed 3 symptoms of the main symptoms of the malaria. Those were cold stage, hot stage and the sweating stage. In the cold stage, the fever comes with an extreme sensation of the cold. Further, in the stage of the hot stage, the body temperature rises about 106 Fahrenheit. Next, in the sweating stage, the fever comes down with an extreme sweating. Okay. Then further, we discuss various controls, in which we discussed the destruction of the adult and the larva and the pupa. Then we discussed the treatment, in which there are various treatments such as the quinine and the chloroquine, and further we discussed lastly the preventions of the malaria. Today we will discuss one new disease, that is called Ascariasis. Okay, so Ascariasis, the first point, it is an helminthes disorder caused by the nematode Ascarias lumbricoides. It is a helminthes disorder caused by nematode Ascaris lumbricoides. Okay, as it is a scientific name, you should underline this. Second point, these parasites are monogenetic in nature. As we discussed in the case of the malaria and the filariasis, the parasite were digenetic, means they include 2 hosts, but in this case it is monogenetic and the host is a human. The parasite is monogenetic, having the host human. Third point, it affects the small intestine of the human, by which it acts as an endoparasite of the small intestine. It affects the small intestine and act as an endoparasite of small intestine in human. Next point, it is more often general in case of the children. It is more often caused in the case of children's. Next one, generally the female Ascaris is quite longer as compared to the male Ascaris. When we will do practical in our coming classes, then you will see we have in our laboratory the female Ascaris and also the male Ascaris, in which you can see that the female Ascaris is quite longer as compared to the male Ascaris. Female Ascaris is longer than the male Ascaris. Next point, how it is diagnosed? The Ascaris can be diagnosed from the stool of the infected person. Okay, the Ascaris, the disease, can be diagnosed from the stool of the infected person. As we know that this disease is mainly caused due to the contamination, or when we take the contaminated water or food, then this is the main cause of this disease. And after the person, the stool that comes out of the person as a fecal matter, in that also the Ascaris remains. Okay, so your last point is the disease can be diagnosed from the stool of the infected person. So these are your some introduction general point. First point, it is an helminthes disorder which is caused by the nematode Ascaris lumbricoid. Second point is these are monogenetic, as it consists of only one host, that is your human. Third point is it affects basically your small intestine and it acts as an endoparasite of the small intestine. Fourth one is it is more often caused in case of the children, and the female Ascaris is longer as compared to the male. And last point, generally this disease can be diagnosed from the stool of the infected person. Okay, please note down. Now we will discuss the mode of infection. First point, the mode of infection in case of Ascariasis is direct and oral. The mode of infection in case of Ascaris is direct and oral. When we take contaminated food and water consisting of the infected stage, such as your capsule with the second stage of juvenile, is present in the food, then it causes the Ascariasis. When we take contaminated food and water, the infective stage that is capsule with second stage of juvenile is present. Next, what is the incubation period? The incubation period is about 2 months. The incubation period is about 2 months. Okay. Next point, passive vectors are your flies and cockroach. Okay, means they act as a vector which can spread the parasite. So in the mode of infection there are important 4 points. The mode of infection in the case of Ascariasis is direct and oral. When we take generally the contaminated food and water, in that the infected stage, such as your capsule with second stage juvenile, which is the rhabdidiform larva, is present. And third point, the incubation period means the period when he or she is exposed to the disease, and to the period by which he or she can show the noticeable symptoms is the incubation period. And the incubation period in the case of the Ascariasis is about 2 months. And last point, the passive vectors for the Ascariasis are flies and cockroach. Please note down. Now come to your symptoms of the Ascariasis. First symptoms is your irritation of the mucous membrane in the case of the intestine, then your abdominal pain and also some sort of indigestion. It is also seen in the case of the Ascariasis. Then your weakness is seen, nausea is seen, Nausea means it is a tendency to vomit. As you know, notice when some have the phobia for traveling in the bus or in the car, so this leads to the nausea, means it is tendency to vomit. It is not vomiting, it is a tendency to vomiting. And also vomiting is also one of the important symptoms in the case of the ascariasis. Then the diarrhea. Obviously leading the indigestion will lead to the diarrhea. Then this is the some important symptoms that are of the ascariasis. Next, what are the heavy infections of the ascariasis? Next is your enteritis, in which the irritation, or we can say the inflammation of the intestine takes place. Okay, inflammation means, or we can say some sort of sore is present in the case of the intestine. Then the pneumonia also, it is some sort of a breathing disorder, in which it is more, we can say, one of the heavy infection in the case of the ascariasis. Then also hepatitis, it is also one of the heavy infection caused by the ascariasis. Appendicitis, you know, it is an inflammation caused in the vermiform appendix. Next, in the blockage of the intestine, as the more number of parasites are being accumulated, which will lead to the blockage of the intestine. Next, the coma, it is a nervous disorder in which the person is more than for many time in the unconscious states, which is your coma. Last one is your convulsion, which is also, it is a nervous disorder in which frequent contraction and relaxation of the muscles takes place. So these are your various symptoms and the heavy infection. In the symptoms, first we discuss the irritation of mucous membrane, then also we discuss the abdominal pain, indigestion, weakness, nausea, vomiting, and also diarrhea. Whereas various heavy infection are enteritis, pneumonia, hepatitis, and also appendicitis, blockage of intestine, coma, and lastly the convulsion. Next, come to the various treatment. Obviously, as it is due to the ascaris, we can use various anti-ascariasis drugs such as your piperazine and also the mebendazole and etc. Okay. So these are your various symptoms, heavy infection, and the treatment such as your drugs like piperazine and the mebendazole, etc. Next, come to your prevention and control of the ascariasis. As we know that the prevention is better than the cure, then obviously we should take some major prevents how to control the ascariasis. So the major prevent that we can take, that is your washing your hands properly before the meal. Before eating means washing your hands before the meal. Okay, next. Obviously, as we know, it can spread due to the contamination of the food and water. Then obviously the food that we will cook should be washed properly. So proper washing of the fruits and vegetables. Okay. Drinking boiled water in case of normal water instead of normal water. Drinking boiled water. Okay. Next, disposal of the human feces. As we know, it can spread due to the stool of the human beings. So we can say your fourth, the major prevention is your disposal of human feces, or we can say the fecal matters. Prevention of the human defecation outdoor. Okay, outdoor defecation can be prevented. Last point is your proper coverage of the food, by which we can prevent from the contamination of the food. Last point is your proper coverage of the food. Okay, so these are major prevention and control. So these are your various prevention and control. First is obvious, that is you should wash your hand before the meal. Then proper washing of the fruits and vegetable. Drinking obviously the boiled water, so that we can prevent from the contamination of the water. Disposal of the human feces, or we can say the human fecal matters. Then the outdoor defecation can be prevented, should be prevented. We can write should be prevented. The outdoor defecation should be prevented. Okay. By which you and the last point is your proper coverage of the food, by which we can prevent the contamination of the food. So this is all about your Ascaris. Okay, please note down. Next we will discuss another disease, that is your typhoid. Okay, typhoid is a disease which is caused by a rod-like bacteria, rod-like gram-negative bacteria, so called Salmonella typhi. It is a disease caused by gram-negative bacteria Salmonella typhi. As it is scientific name, we will underline this. Okay. So it is a disease caused by the gram-negative bacteria called the Salmonella typhi. It is present in the intestine, that is why it is also called the enteric fever. It is present inside the intestine, as it is called as, it is also called as enteric fever or typhoid fever. So what are your general mode of infection in the case of the typhoid? The mode of infection is direct and oral. Okay. When we generally intake or use contaminated food and water, which is spread, which is get contaminated from the feces of the typhoid suffering person, then it causes the typhoid. When we take contaminated food and water which was contaminated by the feces of the typhoid suffering person. Next point is your flies act as a passive vector in the case of typhoid. Okay, as the passive vector in the case of the typhoid, the flies play the main role in the playing the passive vector. Next, the incubation period in the case of the typhoid is about 1 to 3 weeks. Okay, the incubation period is about 1 to 3 weeks. Okay, so these are some introduction point. As the typhoid, it is a disease caused by the gram-negative bacteria. As we know, the bacteria are of two types, gram-positive also gram-negative, but the typhoid is caused by a disease by a gram-negative bacteria called the Salmonella typhi. It is present in the intestine, that is why it is also called the enteric fever, and also it is also called the typhoid fever. Next, the mode of infection is direct and oral, as also it was in the case of the ascariasis. Next, when we take the contaminated food or water which was get contaminated from the feces of the typhoid suffering person. Next, how this get contaminated or who plays the main role? The fly act as a passive actor in the case of the typhoid. And lastly, the incubation period is about 1 to 3 weeks. In the typhoid, if we will go in detail in some history, then a lady named Mary Typhoid was unknowingly suffering from the disease called typhoid. As she was a cook, so she means due to the time the lady named the Mary Typhoid, she passed on this typhoid disease to so many persons. As she was a cook, but due to as she was affected by the typhoid, so she also helps, or she used to act as a carrier to so many people's this disease, or we can say the typhoid disease. So on the name of that lady, this disease name also was given as the typhoid. Okay, please note down. Now come to the various symptoms, diagnosis and treatment in the case of the typhoid. Whereas many symptoms can be seen, such as your inflammation and enlargement of the large intestine, spleen and also the liver. Second important symptom is your, as we see in the case of the ascariasis also, abdominal pain, loss of pay or loss of appetite means not having hunger to eat anything. Okay, then weakness, constant fever, high temperature. As we know, our normal temperature is about 37 degrees centigrade. If high temperature is present, about 39 to 40 degrees centigrade. So it is also one of the main important symptoms of the typhoid. Then colored rash on the chest, okay, or we can say the ulceration of the intestine means having a sore in the intestine. So these are your various important symptoms in the case of the typhoid. Another important 1-mark objective is there in the case of typhoid. It can come in your exams that the typhoid is diagnosed by which test? Then your answer will be, it is one of the important 1-mark objective, that is your Widal test, WIDAL, Widal test. If it is asked by which test the typhoid is being diagnosed, then your answer will be Widal test. It is 1-mark important objective. Lastly, by using various treatments such as your anti-typhoid drugs such as the ampicillin and the chloromycetin. Okay, so these are your various treatments such as your ampicillin and the chloromycetin. So till now we discussed the symptoms, diagnosis, it is done by the Widal test, and lastly we have discussed the treatments such as anti-typhoid drugs such as ampicillin and the chloromycetin. Okay, please note down. Next come to your prevention and control of the typhoid. As we have seen the prevention and control in the case of ascariasis also, same prevention almost by using the proper washing of the fruits and vegetables, taking clean and boiled water. Okay, as we know it also caused due to the contamination of the water and the food. Then also by the proper disposal of the human feces or the fecal matters. Lastly, we can have protection of the food from the flies by proper coverage of the food. Okay, as also it was the same prevention and control in the case of the ascariasis. Next, what are your various vaccination or the various typhoid vaccines that are available? There are two types of vaccine. One is your VI antigen vaccine, other one is your oral type 21A vaccine. In the case of the VI antigen vaccine, it is an injectable vaccine, whereas the TY21 vaccine is your oral vaccine. So as it is an injectable vaccine, it consists of various inactivated bacteria, and in the case of the oral TY21A vaccine, it is an oral, consists of the live form of the bacteria. So it is called as your oral live vaccine, and in the case of VI antigen vaccine, it consists of the inactivated form of the bacteria. Lastly, the VI antigen vaccines we give in a single dose, whereas in the case of the oral TY21A vaccine, it is given in the form of the capsules are given on each of the alternate days. Okay, so these are your various prevention and control and vaccination. You should remember, means there are two types, VI antigen vaccine and other one is your oral TY21A vaccine. Okay, in the VI antigen vaccine, as we discussed, this is an injectable vaccine, and the oral or the oral TY21A vaccine consists of oral live form of the vaccine. Okay, in this type of vaccine, the inactivated bacteria is being used. But in the case of the oral Ty21A vaccine, the live form of the bacteria are being used. Okay, this is given in only a single dose, but in this case of the oral Ty21A vaccine, it is given in the form of the capsule on the alternate days. Okay, so today we discuss in detail about the ascariasis, how it is being caused, various prevention and control, and also we discuss the typhoid. Also we discuss some points of the typhoid, what are the various cause, how it is being caused, okay, by which bacteria it is being caused. Then we also discuss various prevention and control, and lastly we discuss the vaccination of the typhoid. Okay, so this is all about your today's class. We'll discuss today two more important diseases. One is your ascariasis we discussed, and another one we discuss the typhoid. So that's all for today. We will meet in our next class. Thank you.